My husband hit me at a crowded Manhattan steakhouse, and the most shocking part was not the sharp sting across my cheek. It was my mother-in-law leaning over her half-eaten plate to whisper 5 words that shattered my marriage forever. I stayed, so do not be me. My name is Riley. 33 years old, and up until that fateful Thursday evening, I thought I was simply the quiet wife of an ambitious tech startup CEO. What my husband Nolan did not realize was that my silence was never submission. It was a calculated investigation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build a secret escape plan from a toxic family. Trust me, you will want to hear how I turned a public humiliation into the ultimate financial takedown. We were supposed to be celebrating. We sat in the private dining room of one of the most exclusive steakhouses in Manhattan, surrounded by mahogany-paneled walls and the low hum of wealthy patrons. Nolan was 35 and weeks away from taking his health technology company public. The IPO was supposed to make him a billionaire. Lately, the pressure had turned him into a paranoid, controlling nightmare. But he had always kept his rage confined to our penthouse. He had never crossed the physical line. The table was a masterclass in toxic family dynamics. At the head sat my father-in-law Richard, a man who worshipped money and optics above all else. Next to him was my mother-in-law Beatrice, shrinking into her designer dress as she always did. Across from me sat my sister-in-law Penelope, draped in diamonds her husband paid for sipping champagne and complaining about the service. Beside her was Jamal. Jamal was Penelope's husband, a brilliant and warm African-American creative director who was truly the only decent person in the entire family. Jamal was trying to lighten the suffocating mood. He launched into a hilarious story about a disastrous golf outing he had with some arrogant tech investors. His delivery was perfect. I could not help it. I let out a genuine loud laugh. It was the first time I had smiled all week. Nolan had been glaring at his phone, obsessing over an email from his legal team. My laughter seemed to snap something violent inside his brain. He turned to me, his eyes dark and empty. Without a single word of warning, his hand shot out. The slap cracked like a bullwhip across the quiet dining room. My head snapped sideways. My vision flashed white, then blurred into a dizzying spin of crystal wine glasses and silver cutlery. The metallic taste of blood instantly bloomed against my teeth. The string quartet playing softly in the background suddenly seemed drowned out by a deafening hollow ringing in my ears. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I slowly turned my face back to the center of the table. Nolan was lowering his hand. His chest heaved beneath his bespoke suit. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched. Jamal was the first to react. His eyes widened in absolute horror. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice deep and laced with immediate danger. Jamal pushed his heavy oak chair back, his large frame rising to tower over the table, ready to defend me. "Sit down," Jamal Richard snapped from the head of the table. My father-in-law did not even look at my bleeding lip. He casually dabbed the corners of his mouth with a linen napkin. "This is a private marital matter. Keep your voice down because we are in public and you are making a scene." Penelope immediately grabbed Jamal by the forearm. Her acrylic nails dug into his skin as she yanked him back down into his seat. She shot me a glare of pure disgust, as if my bleeding lip was intentionally ruining the aesthetics of her luxurious evening. "You are embarrassing me, Riley," Nolan whispered. His tone was not apologetic. It was dripping with venomous control. "Wipe your mouth. You know I am stressed about the IPO." I did not reach for a napkin. I did not cry. I sat perfectly still, processing the seismic shift that had just fractured my entire reality. That was when I felt a slight movement to my left. Beatrice leaned slightly toward me. Her eyes remained fixed dead ahead on her plate, terrified to draw Richard's attention. But her voice, brittle and paper-thin, slipped directly into my ear. "I stayed," she whispered, her voice trembling with decades of unspoken grief. "Do not be me." My breath hitched. I looked at Beatrice. For the very first time in our 5 years of marriage, I noticed the faint decades-old scar cutting through her left eyebrow, cleverly hidden beneath layers of expensive foundation. A cold chill washed over me. She had lived this nightmare. She had surrendered. The shock evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I pushed my chair back. "Riley, sit down right now," Nolan ordered. The anger in his voice shifted into a desperate threat. "We are celebrating the IPO tonight. Do not ruin this." I picked up my clutch. I looked at Jamal, giving him a brief nod of gratitude. Then I looked at Richard, who was pretending I did not exist. Finally, I looked dead into Nolan's eyes. "The IPO is not going to save you," I said evenly. My voice did not shake. I turned on my heel and walked out of the private dining room. I did not run. I kept my shoulders back and my spine rigid. As I pushed through the heavy brass doors out into the freezing Manhattan night, a tear spilled over my swollen cheek. But it was not a tear of sorrow. It was pure, unadulterated rage. Nolan thought I was just his obedient wife who did freelance bookkeeping. He had no idea I was a licensed forensic accountant who tracked every single penny of his fraudulent company. He had just declared war on the wrong woman. I did not make it to the revolving glass doors before his heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor behind me. "Riley, stop walking right now." Nolan barked the order, his voice echoing in the opulent lobby of the steakhouse. I kept my pace steady, my heels clicking sharply against the polished stone. He caught up to me just as I reached the coat check counter. His large hand clamped down on my bicep, his fingers digging into my skin with enough force to leave bruises. He spun me around to face him. The terrified coat check attendant quickly averted her eyes, pretending to busy herself with a row of cashmere overcoats. "What is wrong with you, Nolan?" hissed his face inches from mine. "You are completely overreacting. You know how much pressure I am under with the initial public offering next week. The investors are breathing down my neck, the board is questioning my financial projections, and you decide to sit there laughing like an absolute idiot at a stupid joke. You practically forced my hand." I stood completely still and stared directly at the man I had peacefully slept next to for the last 5 long years. He was not apologizing. He was actively rewriting history right in front of me, shifting the blame for his physical violence onto my laughter. It was textbook gaslighting. "You hit me in the face, Nolan," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "I did not hit you," he scoffed, rolling his eyes as if he were dealing with a petulant toddler. "I tapped you to get your attention because you were embarrassing me in front of my family. You need to control your emotions, Riley. You are acting crazy." Before I could respond to his absurd delusion, the heavy brass doors of the private dining room swung open again. My father-in-law, Richard, marched into the lobby, followed closely by Penelope and Jamal. Richard did not look concerned about my safety. He looked profoundly inconvenienced by the disruption. "Riley, this behavior is entirely unacceptable," Richard stated coldly, casually adjusting his expensive silk tie. "A good wife supports her husband during stressful business transitions. She does not throw dramatic temper tantrums and walk out on a high-profile dinner. You need to be a better wife. Go back in that room and apologize to the table for causing a scene." Jamal pushed past Richard, his face etched with genuine fury. "Apologize," Jamal yelled, his deep voice rattling the crystal chandelier above us. "Your son just assaulted her, Richard. Are you all completely insane?" Jamal reached out, trying to pry Nolan's hand off my arm. "Let go of her right now, man." But Penelope was faster. She grabbed Jamal by the collar of his tailored jacket and yanked him backward with surprising force. "Stay out of this." "Jamal." Penelope snapped, her voice shrill and dripping with pure condescension. "This is family business. Riley is just being hysterical to get attention because she is jealous of Nolan's success. She is a glorified calculator who sits at home all day while my brother is building a multi-million-dollar empire. Stop acting like a savior and get back in the dining room." Jamal looked at his wife with a mixture of absolute disgust and disbelief. He shook his head slowly, finally realizing he was surrounded by ruthless monsters. I looked down at Nolan's hand, which was still gripping my arm tightly, leaving pale indentations on my skin. "Take your hand off me," I commanded. My tone was so devoid of emotion, so chillingly calm, that Nolan actually flinched. His grip loosened just enough for me to yank my arm free. "I am leaving," I announced, turning my back on all of them without another word. "Do not dare walk out that door," Nolan shouted, his face turning a deep crimson. "If you get in a cab right now, do not bother coming back to our house. I will lock you out and cut you off completely." I ignored his pathetic threats, pushed through the heavy revolving doors, and stepped out into the freezing New York night. A bright yellow taxi was already idling right at the edge of the curb. I quickly opened the rear door and slid into the worn leather seat. "Take me straight to the Plaza Hotel, please," I told the cab driver clearly. As the cab rapidly pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic, I looked out the tinted window. Nolan was standing on the brightly lit sidewalk, screaming something I could not hear, his fists clenched tight in blind rage. My cell phone immediately began to vibrate violently inside my designer purse. The financial war had officially begun tonight, and I was entirely prepared to destroy his entire fraudulent empire. I pulled my phone from my purse as the taxi sped down Fifth Avenue. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the cab, flashing with a relentless stream of push notifications. They were not just angry text messages from my husband. They were automated security alerts from our banking app, firing off one after another in rapid succession. I watched in real time as Nolan executed a systematic financial blackout. Alert: transfer of $145,000 from joint savings to a private account. Alert: transfer of $32,000 from joint checking to an external holding company. Alert: the credit limit on your Visa card has been reduced to 0. Alert: your primary debit card has been reported stolen and is permanently deactivated. Within 4 minutes, my legal access to the life we built together was completely erased. Then came the text messages. Nolan was typing furiously, his words dripping with the toxic arrogance of a man who believed he held all the power. "Did you really think you could walk out on me without consequences?" he wrote. "I own everything: the house, the cars, the bank accounts. You are just a guest in my life. Let us see how far your pride takes you when you cannot even buy a cup of coffee." I stared at the screen. I did not reply. That only enraged him further. Another text popped up instantly. "Turn the cab around right now. Come back, get on your knees, and apologize to my father for embarrassing our family. If you do not, you will be sleeping on the streets tonight. I will make sure you have absolutely nothing left." He was deploying the textbook strategy of a financial abuser. Isolate panic and force submission through absolute dependency. He wanted me terrified. He wanted me crying in the back of this taxi, realizing I was destitute and begging for forgiveness. But he made one massive miscalculation. He forgot what I did for a living. By draining our joint assets without a court order, Nolan was legally documenting his own financial misconduct and sending the evidence directly to my phone. Every transfer alert was a nail in his coffin. The taxi pulled up to the grand entrance of the Plaza Hotel. I reached into the hidden zippered compartment of my clutch and pulled out a crisp $100 bill from my emergency cash stash. I handed it to the driver, told him to keep the change, and stepped into the biting winter air. Walking into the plaza was like stepping into another world. The lobby was a breathtaking display of polished marble, glittering chandeliers, and massive arrangements of white lilies. It was an environment designed for the ultra-wealthy, a stark contrast to a woman who had just had her net worth stripped to 0. I approached the front desk. A young woman in a sharp uniform offered a warm, professional smile. "Good evening, madam. How can I help you tonight?" she asked. "I need a suite," I said clearly. "The largest one available on the park side." "Certainly. May I have a credit card for the deposit and the room rate?" she requested, her fingers poised over her keyboard. I decided to play out the string just to confirm Nolan's petty vindictiveness. I handed her the heavy metal chase card that had my name on it. She swiped it through the terminal. The machine immediately flashed a red light and beeped. I am sorry, Mrs. Vance, but this card has been declined, she said, her voice dropping to a polite whisper. Try this one, I said, handing her an American Express Platinum card. She swiped it. Another red light. Another sharp beep. The clerk looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and awkwardness. I am very sorry, ma'am. This one is showing a code for a hard account freeze. Your bank has locked the accounts completely. Do you have another form of payment? Right at that exact second, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a picture message from Nolan. He had sent a screenshot of our joint banking dashboard showing a balance of exactly $0. Below the image was a new text. The front desk just ran the cards, did they not? I get the decline alerts on my phone, Riley. I know exactly where you are and what you are trying to do. It is over. You have no money. You have no power. You have 5 minutes to leave that lobby before I call hotel security and report you for credit card fraud. Come home crawling. I looked up from the threatening message. The desk clerk was waiting patiently, unsure of what to do with a battered woman whose credit cards were all bouncing. Nolan thought this was the moment I would break. He thought this was my absolute rock bottom. He had no idea I had not even begun to fight. I smiled warmly at the desk clerk, refusing to let Nolan's digital terrorism break my composure. Do not worry about those declined cards, I told her smoothly. My husband is currently attempting a hostile takeover of our joint assets. Let us try a different account entirely. I reached past the deactivated plastic and slipped my fingers into a discreet silk lining at the very bottom of my purse. I pulled out a heavy matte black card. It had no bank logo, no magnetic strip, just an embedded chip, and my maiden name, Riley Hayes, etched in silver lettering. Nolan thought my mother was a middle-class public school teacher who left me nothing but student loans and a modest wardrobe. He had absolutely no idea about my maternal grandmother, Josephine. Grandmother Josephine came from old Chicago money, and she had recognized Nolan's narcissistic controlling tendencies the very first time I brought him home for Thanksgiving. Shortly before she passed away, she established an irrevocable generation skipping trust strictly in my name, shielded by an offshore holding company. She handed me this black card and told me to hide it safely until the exact day I needed to buy my freedom. Tonight was that day. The clerk swiped the heavy metal card through her upgraded terminal. The machine did not beep with a rejection. Instead, it quietly printed a very long receipt. The transaction is approved, Ms. Hayes, the clerk said, her eyes widening slightly at whatever unlimited authorization code flashed on her screen. I will upgrade you to our absolute best available accommodation. The Park View penthouse suite is ready for you right now. 10 minutes later, I unlocked the massive double oak doors to the penthouse. The suite was a breathtaking masterpiece of gilded mirrors, crystal fixtures, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark, sprawling expanse of Central Park. I locked the deadbolt, fastened the heavy brass security chain, and finally let out a long, shuddering breath. I walked straight to the marble vanity in the master bathroom and inspected my face under the bright, unforgiving lights. The left side of my jaw was severely bruised, a dark, angry purple swelling blooming against my pale skin. I did not cry. Crying was for victims, and I was a forensic strategist. I walked back into the massive living room, sat down at the heavy mahogany desk, and pulled my laptop from my leather tote bag. I connected to the hotel network, but immediately launched a military-grade encrypted virtual private network. I routed my connection securely through a server in Zurich, then logged into a private wealth management portal based in the Cayman Islands. The screen loaded with a sterile white background and simple black text. Welcome, Ms. Hayes. I clicked on the primary portfolio overview. Available balance, $4,520,400. Nolan truly thought I was penniless, terrified, and wandering the freezing streets of Manhattan. In reality, I was sitting securely in a $10,000 a night penthouse, armed with enough liquid capital to completely bury him and his entire fraudulent family. I picked up my phone. Nolan had sent 6 more threatening text messages and called 14 times. I blocked his personal number, blocked his parents, and blocked Penelope. Let them scream into the digital void. Then I opened my contacts and dialed a number I had saved under a fake name months ago, back when the glaring financial discrepancies in Nolan's startup first started keeping me awake at night. The line rang twice before a sharp, no-nonsense female voice answered immediately. "Diana Rossini Law Offices," the voice said. Diana Rossini was not a friendly family mediator. She was the most feared, ruthless divorce and financial litigation attorney in the entire state of New York. She charged $1,500 an hour and strictly took cases that involved complex asset division, hidden wealth, and corporate sabotage. "Diana." "It is Riley," I said, staring at my bruised reflection in the dark window pane. "You were completely right about him. The financial abuse just turned physical. He hit me in public, locked all the joint accounts, and thinks he has left me with absolutely nothing." I heard the sharp scratching of a pen on paper over the phone line. "Are you safe right now, Riley?" Diana asked. Her tone was strictly business, which was exactly the cold logic I needed. "I am safe at the plaza," I replied calmly. "I used the offshore account. I have full unrestricted access to the trust fund." "Good," Diana said smoothly. "Nolan just made the biggest mistake of his arrogant life. By draining the marital accounts without a court order, he just handed us a silver bullet for financial misconduct. And the physical assault gives us grounds for immediate emergency orders. I want you in my office at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning. Bring your laptop, bring all the forensic accounting files you have secretly compiled on his startup, and bring a clear photograph of your face. We are going to file for divorce, secure a restraining order, and prepare the financial guillotine. I will be there, I promised." I ended the call and closed my laptop with a satisfying click. Nolan wanted a war, and he thought he was fighting a defenseless civilian. He was about to find out he had declared war on an apex predator. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the plaza penthouse, watching the sun slowly rise over Central Park. My bruised jaw throbbed with a dull ache, a physical reminder of the war that had just begun. At 6 in the morning, I opened my laptop to begin organizing the financial files for my meeting with Diana. Out of habit, I opened a new tab and checked my social media feeds. That was when I discovered Nolan had launched his preemptive strike. He was not just trying to isolate me financially. He was trying to destroy my reputation before I could even tell my side of the story. Nolan knew that in the corporate world, optics were everything. With his health technology company going public in less than a week, he could not afford a domestic violence scandal. So he decided to spin the narrative. I stared at his latest LinkedIn post, which had already racked up thousands of likes and supportive comments from investors and tech executives. The post was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. It read, "As many of you know, building a startup takes a heavy toll on families. Last night, my wife suffered a severe mental breakdown during a public dinner. She became highly unstable and physically aggressive, forcing me to take defensive measures to protect myself and my family." The audacity of his lie made my blood run cold. He was painting himself as the tragic, long-suffering husband of an erratic woman. The post continued, "Mental health is a serious issue, and I am currently ensuring she gets the professional psychiatric help she desperately needs while we navigate this painful separation. I ask for your privacy and prayers as I continue to focus on bringing our company to the public market next week." He had perfectly weaponized the language of therapy and mental health awareness to cover up a physical assault. It was a pathetic attempt to rewrite history and silence me. If Nolan was playing the corporate martyr, his sister Penelope was playing the schoolyard bully. I clicked over to Instagram. My feed was immediately flooded with Penelope's stories. She had recorded a video from the back seat of her chauffeured car, sipping an iced latte and wearing a smug smile. Her voice was dripping with fake sympathy as she spoke directly into the camera. She said, "It is just so sad when people marry into successful families and then completely lose their minds when they cannot handle the pressure. Some people are just built for basic bookkeeping, not billionaire lifestyles. The next story was a photo of a garbage bag sitting on the front porch of the house I shared with Nolan. The caption read, "Taking out the trash. Hope the gold digger enjoys the homeless shelter because her free ride is officially over." Penelope was tagging her wealthy friends, treating my abuse and sudden homelessness as a hilarious reality television episode. She was so blinded by her own privilege that she failed to realize she was publicly documenting the illegal eviction of a legal spouse. I smiled coldly at her massive mistake. I did not feel the urge to comment, argue, or defend myself online. Engaging with a narcissist publicly only feeds their ego and validates their victim narrative. Instead, I calmly took high-resolution screenshots of every single post, every comment, and every uploaded video. I saved Nolan's LinkedIn manifesto. I recorded Penelope's malicious Instagram stories. I compiled all of it into a secure digital folder labeled Exhibit A. They thought they were winning the public relations war. In reality, they were handing my lawyer a perfectly wrapped gift of defamation, libel, and documented emotional distress. I closed the social media tabs and opened my encrypted forensic accounting software. I had spent the last 6 months quietly downloading every financial ledger, every offshore transfer receipt, and every hidden corporate email from Nolan's startup. I loaded all the data onto a secure flash drive. I took a quick shower, dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit that projected absolute authority, and carefully tied my hair back. I did not bother trying to conceal the dark purple bruise on my jaw with makeup. Let the world see exactly what Nolan had done. At exactly 7:30, I walked out of the Plaza Hotel and hailed a cab to Diana Rossini's law firm. My phone was still entirely silent, completely blocked from the toxic digital noise of my in-laws. I looked out the window at the busy Manhattan streets, feeling a strange sense of absolute calm. Nolan had struck the first blow at the restaurant. He had struck the second blow with the bank accounts. He had struck the third blow with the internet smear campaign. I walked into Diana Rossini's corner office just as the clock struck 8. Diana took one look at my bruised face, then at the thick file folder and encrypted flash drive I placed on her mahogany desk. She did not offer pity. She offered strategy. We spent the next hour mapping out a brutal legal counteroffensive. Diana immediately drafted an ex parte restraining order based on the physical assault and began preparing our own divorce petition. She warned me that Nolan was likely scrambling to file first to control the narrative and secure a favorable jurisdiction. I told her I welcomed his best shot. By 10 o'clock, I left Diana's office and headed to Midtown Manhattan. Despite the chaos of my personal life, I had a job to do. I was scheduled to conduct a quarterly forensic audit for one of my largest corporate clients, a multinational logistics firm. I walked into their sleek glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor, greeting the chief financial officer and his executive team. They immediately noticed the dark purple bruise on my jaw, but my uncompromising professional demeanor kept them from asking invasive questions. We spread our confidential documents across the massive conference table and got straight to work. 45 minutes into the intensive meeting, the heavy glass door of the boardroom swung open without a single knock. The floor receptionist stood in the doorway looking panicked, trailing behind a short, balding man in an ill-fitting gray suit. He carried a thick manila envelope and wore a smug, predatory grin that made my stomach turn. "Are you Riley Hayes?" the man barked intentionally, pitching his voice loud enough to echo off the glass walls and draw the attention of everyone in the room. I slowly looked up from my complex spreadsheets. "I am busy," I replied coldly. "Whatever this is, you need to leave my client's office immediately. I am Attorney Davies, representing your husband Nolan," the man announced, stepping further into the room and slapping the thick envelope right onto the center of the conference table. "Consider yourself officially served. My client has filed for an expedited divorce." The executives around me froze in stunned silence. This was a highly calculated public ambush. Nolan wanted to humiliate me in front of my most lucrative client, hoping to damage my professional reputation and break my composure. He wanted me to cry, scream, or lose my temper, the way he had falsely described in his defamatory LinkedIn post. If I reacted poorly, his sleazy lawyer would document it as further proof of my alleged mental instability. Instead, I calmly picked up the envelope, pulled out the legal documents, and began scanning the front page. Mr. Davies puffed out his chest and decided to summarize the demands for the benefit of my shocked audience. "Let me save you the reading time," he sneered. "Nolan is seeking full and exclusive possession of the marital home. He is also requesting that all frozen joint accounts remain under his sole control to protect the assets from your documented erratic behavior. Furthermore, my client is formally requesting spousal support." The chief financial officer sitting next to me actually let out a small gasp of disbelief. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my eyes fixed on the ridiculous legal petition. "Spousal support," I repeated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "That is correct," Davies said, crossing his arms aggressively. "As detailed in the sworn financial affidavit attached to that petition, Nolan's technology startup is currently in a pre-revenue phase. He takes zero salary and lives entirely on debt and investor capital. You, on the other hand, have a steady documented income from your freelance bookkeeping business. Until his company goes public and stabilizes, you are legally obligated to maintain his standard of living. He expects $5,000 a month." It was a breathtaking display of financial perjury. Nolan was about to launch a multi-million-dollar initial public offering in less than a week, yet he had just signed a legally binding sworn document claiming he was essentially impoverished and required my modest income to survive. He thought his hidden offshore transfers and Cayman Island shadow accounts were completely untraceable. He believed he had successfully hidden millions of dollars from the family courts. By submitting this fake financial affidavit to a judge, he had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed for federal fraud charges. I looked up from the papers and met Davies's arrogant gaze. I did not yell. I did not defend myself to my clients. I simply smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "Please tell Nolan I received his petition," I said smoothly, "and please inform him that I am absolutely fascinated by his sworn financial affidavit. I look forward to discussing his pre-revenue status in front of a judge at tomorrow's mediation." Davies frowned, clearly unsettled by my complete lack of panic. He turned on his heel and marched out of the boardroom. I neatly stacked the divorce papers, placed them in my briefcase, and turned back to the chief financial officer. "My apologies for the interruption," I said without missing a beat. "Shall we return to the audit?" The following morning, the sky over Manhattan was a slate gray, threatening freezing rain. I walked into the downtown mediation center wearing a tailored charcoal suit that left my bruised jaw completely exposed. Diana Rossini walked beside me carrying a sleek leather briefcase that contained the financial ruin of my soon-to-be ex-husband. We were directed to a sterile, windowless conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and anxiety. The mediator, a neutral third party named Mr. Harrison, was already sitting at the head of the heavy oak table. He greeted us politely and explained the ground rules for the session. He emphasized the importance of transparency and honesty in these proceedings. 5 minutes later, the heavy door opened. Nolan walked in, followed closely by his smarmy attorney Davies. I had to suppress a cold laugh at my husband's wardrobe choice. The man who regularly dropped $5,000 on bespoke Italian suits was wearing an off-the-rack, slightly wrinkled navy blazer. He had clearly skipped his morning shave, leaving a shadow of stubble on his jaw to make himself look exhausted and distressed. He refused to make eye contact with me, keeping his head bowed as he took his seat on the opposite side of the table. It was a pathetic, highly calculated performance, designed to sell his narrative of the abused, struggling spouse. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and officially opened the mediation. He noted that the primary goal today was to establish temporary orders regarding housing financial support and asset protection while the divorce proceeded through the legal system. Davies immediately took control of the conversation. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and began weaving a completely fabricated tale of woe. "Mr. Harrison, my client, is currently going through an incredibly traumatic period," Davies said, his voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. As you may know, Nolan is the founder of a promising but highly volatile health technology startup. Building this company has drained his personal resources completely. He takes no salary, he relies entirely on investor capital just to keep the lights on and pay his hardworking employees. Nolan stared down at his hands, playing the role of the broken entrepreneur flawlessly. He even let out a heavy, tired sigh for dramatic effect. Unfortunately, Davies continued. The immense pressure of this situation has taken a severe toll on the marriage. Recently, my client's wife suffered a severe emotional breakdown, resulting in a physical altercation where Nolan was forced to defend himself. Given her documented instability and aggressive outbursts, Nolan had no choice but to secure the joint accounts to prevent her from liquidating what little capital they have left. He was merely protecting their financial future. Diana sat perfectly still next to me, her face an unreadable mask of absolute professionalism. She did not interrupt his ridiculous monologue. We let them dig the legal hole as deep as possible. Davies reached into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He slid them across the polished wooden table toward Mr. Harrison, then handed a duplicate stack to Diana. These are the sworn financial affidavits and the last 6 months of bank statements for both Nolan's personal accounts and his startup. Davies stated proudly. As you can clearly see, my client has a negative net worth. His credit cards are maxed out. The business accounts show a severe cash flow deficit. He is essentially living on borrowed time and borrowed money to keep his dream alive. I looked down at the documents Diana placed in front of me. I did not even need a calculator to dismantle his lies. I could spot the fabricated numbers instantly. The ledgers Davies had just submitted under penalty of perjury were meticulously altered. They showed massive operating expenses and phantom vendor payments that I knew for a fact did not exist. Nolan had completely scrubbed the multi-million-dollar venture capital injections that were quietly sitting in offshore holding accounts. He had erased any trace of his actual wealth. Because of this dire financial reality, Davies concluded, "We are requesting that Nolan retain exclusive use of the marital residence so he has a stable environment to prepare for his upcoming initial public offering." Furthermore, since Ms. Hayes is a fully employed freelance bookkeeper with a steady income, we are formally requesting $5,000 a month in temporary spousal support, plus the immediate payment of my client's legal retainers. The sheer audacity of the demand was almost impressive. Nolan was days away from becoming a billionaire, yet he was sitting in a mediation room, legally demanding that I pay his lawyer and fund his lifestyle with my paycheck. He wanted to bleed me dry, just to prove he held absolute power over my life. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and looked over the falsified bank statements. He sighed deeply, turning to my side of the table with a grave expression. "Miss Rossini," he said gently, "these financials do present a very challenging picture for your client. How do you respond to the request for spousal support and exclusive housing?" Diana did not immediately answer. She turned her head slightly and looked directly at me. I gave her a single sharp nod. The trap was fully set. Nolan had just committed federal perjury in front of a court-appointed official. It was time to introduce him to the real Riley Hayes. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the heavy oak table. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice perfectly measured. "I do not agree to the request for temporary spousal support, nor do I agree to vacate my own home. I reject the premise of Mr. Davies' presentation." Davies scoffed loudly. "Mrs. Hayes, this is not a casual negotiation based on your feelings. We have provided sworn documents that prove my client is under severe economic distress." I ignored the attorney. "Mr. Harrison, there is a fundamental misunderstanding regarding my profession. My husband repeatedly refers to me as a freelance bookkeeper. He genuinely believes I spend my days categorizing small business receipts and balancing simple checkbooks." I reached down, picked up my leather briefcase, and placed it squarely on the table. The metallic click of the brass latches sounded exactly like the cocking of a loaded weapon. "I am not a bookkeeper," I stated clearly. I am a certified public accountant in New York. I am also a licensed forensic accountant and a certified fraud examiner. My actual job is to dissect complex corporate financial structures, identify money laundering schemes, and testify as an expert witness in federal court cases involving corporate embezzlement. Nolan let out a nervous laugh. He looked at his lawyer with a dismissive smirk. What on earth are you talking about, Riley? You do taxes for local bakeries. I pulled out a stack of documents twice as thick as the one Davies had presented. I slid the master copy to Mr. Harrison and tossed a duplicate file directly in front of Nolan. I do taxes for multinational logistics firms and investigate venture capital fraud, I corrected him. Color slowly drained from his face. And for the past 6 months, my primary investigative subject has been your health technology startup. Mr. Harrison opened the heavy folder. The first page was an executive summary I had meticulously prepared, complete with data flow charts and offshore routing numbers. If you look at page 4, I continued adopting the authoritative tone I used when briefing federal agents. You will see a forensic breakdown of the bank statements Mr. Davies just submitted under oath. My husband claims his company is pre-revenue and bleeding cash. That is entirely false. His startup recently received a massive round of Series B funding from private investors. Davies slapped his hand on the table. This is absolutely outrageous. You cannot just invent financial fantasies to avoid paying support. I turned my cold gaze to the attorney. Mr. Davies, I strongly suggest you stop speaking before you formally implicate yourself in your client's federal crimes. The venture capital money did not vanish into operating expenses. It was systematically diverted. Between March and October, I explained to the mediator Nolan established a series of phantom vendor accounts. He created fake invoices for proprietary software consulting that never actually occurred. He then wired those funds out of the primary business account to intentionally make the company look impoverished prior to filing for divorce. Nolan was no longer laughing. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were stark white. His jaw clenched tight. His fake stubble suddenly made him look legitimately terrified. Where exactly did the money go? Mr. Harrison asked. His professional neutrality had slipped into genuine shock. If you turn to page 12, I instructed politely, you will find the certified wire transfer receipts. The funds were routed through an anonymous shell company registered in Delaware. From there, they were moved directly into an offshore holding account based in the Cayman Islands, an account solely controlled by my husband. The total amount he has illegally siphoned from his own investors and attempted to hide from this marital estate is exactly $2,300,000. The silence in the room was absolute. Davies stared blankly at the documents in front of him, his mouth slightly open. He was a ruthless divorce lawyer, but he was not an idiot. He knew exactly what federal wire fraud looked like, and he realized his client had just used him to submit perjured documents to a court-appointed official. You illegally accessed my private company servers, Nolan suddenly yelled, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a trembling finger across the table. That is corporate espionage. You are going to federal prison. I smiled warmly, enjoying his complete unraveling. Actually, Nolan, you gave me the administrative passwords 2 years ago when you begged me to help streamline your payroll taxes. You simply forgot to revoke my access. As your legal spouse, accessing financial records on a shared home network to verify marital assets is entirely legal. You hiding $2.3 million while filing a sworn affidavit claiming poverty, however, is a direct felony. Nolan stared at me, the remaining color draining completely from his face. His mouth opened and closed silently. The arrogant, untouchable tech executive was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified man who suddenly realized he was standing on a trapdoor. He looked wildly at his attorney, silently begging for a legal lifeline to pull him out of the massive crater he had just dug for himself. Attorney Davies did not offer one. He scrambled out of his chair with such frantic energy that it tipped backward and crashed loudly onto the floor. Mr. Harrison, I demand you stop taking notes immediately, Davies shouted, waving his hands frantically at the mediator. I formally request that this entire session be struck from the official record. We are suspending this mediation right now. I need to confer with my client in private. Davies was sweating profusely. Submitting fabricated financial affidavits to a court-appointed mediator was not just a simple administrative mistake. It was a fast track to being permanently disbarred, and Davies knew I had just handed him the radioactive evidence. He began frantically sweeping his documents into his leather briefcase, desperate to erase the fact that he had ever presented them. You cannot strike perjury from the record just because you got caught, Diana Rossini said smoothly, not even bothering to look up from her legal notepad. The documents are already formally filed. You signed them, Mr. Davies. Your client swore to them under penalty of perjury. The federal fraud is already in motion, and trying to hide it now only adds obstruction of justice to the growing list of charges. Shut up. Nolan snapped, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of rage and sheer panic. He pointed a shaking finger at me across the heavy oak table. You think you are so incredibly smart, Riley. You think you can just print out some fake spreadsheets and ruin my initial public offering. My board of directors will bury you in endless litigation. I will hire a team of corporate lawyers to tie you up in court for the next decade. You will never see a single dime of my money. I sat perfectly still, letting his desperate threats wash over me. I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I do not want your money, Nolan, I replied, my voice echoing coldly in the sterile room. I have my own money. What I want is absolute accountability. And you are severely misunderstanding the situation if you think this is just a standard divorce dispute over joint checking accounts. Nolan let out a frantic, dismissive laugh. What is that supposed to mean? Are you going to call the local police on me for moving my own company funds around? Good luck with that. They do not care about corporate bookkeeping. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I am not going to call the local police, I said, slowly savoring every single syllable. I do not need to. Because at 6 o'clock this morning, before we even walked into this building, I formally submitted a comprehensive whistleblower report to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The silence that followed was so absolute, so profound, it felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. Mr. Harrison stopped writing entirely. Davies froze in place, his hands still hovering above his open briefcase. Nolan looked as if he had just been physically struck by a freight train. The IRS, he whispered, his voice cracking under the immense weight of the acronym. Yes, the Internal Revenue Service, I confirmed cheerfully. I provided them with the exact same forensic accounting binder you are looking at right now. I gave them the Cayman Islands routing numbers, the Delaware Shell Company registration, and the fabricated vendor invoices. I also submitted a copy to the Securities and Exchange Commission, seeing as you are actively soliciting public investment based on fraudulent valuation metrics. You are lying, Nolan gasped, grabbing the edge of the table to steady his shaking legs. You would not do that. That would destroy the company. That would ruin the IPO. The IPO is already dead, Nolan. I stated, delivering the final crushing blow. The moment the federal regulators review those files, your accounts will be frozen. Your investors will pull out. And you will be facing federal tax evasion and wire fraud charges. You wanted to play games with my financial security to punish me for laughing at a dinner party. Now you get to play games with federal prosecutors. Davies did not say another word. He violently shoved his papers back into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and grabbed Nolan by the arm. We are leaving, Davies ordered his client. Do not say another word. Do not text her. Do not call her. We need to leave this building right now before you make this worse. Nolan stumbled as his lawyer physically dragged him toward the door. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes wide with horrific realization. He finally understood that the quiet, obedient wife he had abused was actually the architect of his total destruction. The heavy door slammed shut behind them, leaving Diana, Mr. Harrison, and me in the quiet room. Diana turned to me and offered a rare, genuine smile. "Well," she said softly, "I believe the absurd request for temporary spousal support has been successfully withdrawn forever." I walked out of the downtown mediation center and stepped onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The freezing rain had finally started to fall heavily, but I felt absolutely invincible. Diana Rossini walked beside me, her heels clicking sharply against the wet pavement. She advised me to go straight back to the Plaza Hotel and let the federal agencies do their jobs. The trap was sprung and Nolan was officially drowning. But before I could even hail a cab, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was not Nolan. It was a text message from my father-in-law, Richard. The message was brief and entirely devoid of warmth. It read, "We need to talk like rational adults. Meet me at the University Club in 30 minutes. Come alone." I showed the screen to Diana. She raised an eyebrow, warning me that anything Richard offered was likely a trap designed to protect his son's crumbling empire. I told her I knew exactly how to handle him. I wanted to look the patriarch of the family directly in the eye and watch him panic. 30 minutes later, I walked into the dark wood-paneled library of the exclusive University Club. The air smelled heavily of expensive cigars, old paper, and generational arrogance. Richard was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair in the far corner, nursing a glass of scotch. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He did not stand up when I approached. He simply gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Have a seat," Riley, Richard commanded, using the exact same tone he used to speak to his employees. I sat down, crossing my legs, resting my hands in my lap. I did not order a drink. I waited for him to speak. He took a slow sip of his scotch, studying me as if I were a puzzle he could not quite solve. "I just got off the phone with Nolan." Richard began, his voice low and carefully measured. "He told me about the little stunt you pulled in the mediation room. You have certainly caused quite a mess. But I am a businessman, Riley. I solve messes for a living. And I know that in the end, everything comes down to a simple transaction. Everyone has a price, and I am here to pay yours." He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of thick paper. He placed it on the small mahogany table between us and slid it slowly toward me. Right behind it, he placed a thick legal document bound by a blue cover. I looked down. It was a certified cashier check drawn from Richard's personal account. It was made out to Riley Hayes in the amount of $500,000. The document underneath it was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, thick enough to double as a doorstop. "That is $500,000 of clean, untraceable cash," Richard said, leaning forward, steepling his fingers together. "For someone with your modest background, that is life-changing money. It is enough to buy a beautiful condo, start your own little accounting firm, and never have to worry about paying a bill again. All you have to do is sign that non-disclosure agreement, finalize an uncontested divorce, and officially retract the ridiculous whistleblower reports you submitted to the federal agencies." I stared at the check. The sheer arrogance of the offer was breathtaking. Richard genuinely believed he could buy his way out of a federal investigation. He thought $500,000 was an astronomical sum that would make a working-class girl fall to her knees in gratitude. He had no idea that I currently had over $4 million sitting comfortably in an offshore trust fund. He had no idea that his bribe was not just illegal, it was downright insulting. "You want me to commit obstruction of justice for $500,000? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. "Retracting a legitimate federal fraud report is a crime, Richard. You are asking me to risk my own freedom to save your son from the consequences of his own theft." Richard let out a harsh, dismissive sigh. "Do not play the righteous crusader with me, Riley. You are angry because Nolan hurt your feelings. He made a mistake at dinner, but you are threatening to destroy a company that is about to go public. You are threatening my family legacy. I am offering you a golden parachute. Take the money, sign the paper, and walk away quietly before you force me to get ugly. Because if you refuse this generous exit package, I promise you I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still in the oversized leather chair and looked at the man who had raised a monster. "What exactly does getting ugly look like, Richard?" I asked. "I want to make sure I fully understand the exact terms of this little arrangement before I make a decision." Richard took another slow sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly against the heavy crystal glass. "It looks like the complete and total destruction of your professional life," he stated matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather. "You are very proud of your little forensic accounting career. You think your CPA license makes you untouchable. You think knowing how to read a spreadsheet gives you power over my family. But you seem to forget who you are dealing with. I do not just play golf at this club, Riley. I sit on the board of directors for 3 of the largest financial institutions in New York. I regularly have dinner with the head of the State Board of Accountancy. I have the personal cell phone numbers of the chief executive officers you currently work for." He leaned forward, his face hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. "If you do not sign that non-disclosure agreement and formally call off the federal dogs by 5 o'clock today, I will make a few phone calls. By tomorrow morning, an anonymous but highly credible ethics complaint will be filed against your professional license. I will personally ensure the State Board launches a full investigation into your auditing practices. I will tell them you used your position to illegally access my son's private corporate servers and manufacture false financial documents out of spite over a bitter divorce." I listened carefully as he laid out his master plan. It was textbook corporate extortion, delivered with the practiced ease of a man who had ruined countless lives before mine. "And it will not stop there." Richard continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly whisper. "I will call the executives at that logistics firm you love so much. I will inform them that their trusted accountant is currently under active investigation for corporate espionage and data theft. They will fire you before you even sit down for lunch. Every single client you have will drop you the second they hear the rumors. Your reputation in the financial sector will be permanently radioactive. No reputable firm in this entire country will ever hire you to balance a petty cash drawer, let alone conduct a forensic audit." He tapped his thick index finger against the cashier check resting on the table. "So you have a very simple choice to make right now. You can take this $500,000, walk out of here a wealthy woman, and start a quiet new life somewhere else. Or you can be stubborn, and I will personally see to it that you lose your license, your career, and every ounce of credibility you have ever built. You will be completely bankrupted by legal fees trying to defend yourself against the ethics board. I will crush you so thoroughly that you will wish you had never met my son." Richard leaned back in his chair, looking incredibly satisfied with his speech. He genuinely believed he had backed me into an inescapable corner. He was a man who was used to intimidating people with his massive influence and bottomless bank accounts. He expected me to reach for the pen, sign the document with trembling hands, and take the money in total defeat. Instead, I reached out and placed my index finger on the edge of the cashier check. I slowly slid it back across the polished mahogany table until it rested directly in front of him. "I do not negotiate with criminals, Richard," I said quietly. His smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "You are making a massive mistake, you arrogant little girl," he hissed, his face suddenly flushing with hot anger. "I am offering you the absolute only lifeline you are going to get." "You do not have a lifeline to offer," I replied, standing up slowly from the leather chair and looking down at him. "You are threatening to ruin a career that I built with my own hands. Go ahead and make your phone calls. Call the state board. Call my clients. Tell them whatever lies you want to tell them. Because by the time your golf buddies at the accounting board even open your fabricated ethics complaint, the Securities and Exchange Commission will have already frozen all of your personal assets." Richard gripped the arms of his chair tightly. "What on earth are you talking about?" he demanded. "Did you really think I only investigated Nolan?" I asked, allowing a cold smile to finally touch my lips. Nolan is arrogant, but he is not smart enough to set up an offshore holding company in the Cayman Islands by himself. He needed a wealthy, established guarantor to bypass the strict international banking regulations. I found your digital signature on the corporate formation documents, Richard. You are legally listed as the primary silent partner of the Delaware shell company he used to hide the stolen investor funds. The color instantly drained from his face. The glass of scotch trembled slightly in his hand, sloshing amber liquid over the rim. When the federal agents raid your son's office, I continued smoothly, they are going to raid your house next. You are not going to be sitting on any corporate boards by the end of this month. You are going to be sitting in a federal courtroom trying to explain to a judge why you actively helped your son launder $2 million. Keep your check, Richard. You are going to need every single penny of it to pay for your own criminal defense attorney. I turned my back on the patriarch of the family and walked out of the library, leaving him sitting in stunned, terrified silence. I stepped out of the university club and into the freezing downpour. The adrenaline from leaving Richard speechless pumped fiercely through my veins. I did not bother opening my umbrella. I let the cold rain wash over me as I walked briskly down the avenue. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another pathetic threat from my father-in-law. Instead, the screen displayed a text message from Jamal. "Are you safe? Meet me at the all-night diner on West 57th. I made sure I was not followed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth at the back of a brightly lit, greasy diner. The bell above the door chimed. Jamal walked in. He was wearing a heavy dark coat, the collar pulled up against the rain. The usually vibrant, charismatic creative director looked utterly exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. He scanned the room cautiously before spotting me and sliding into the booth opposite mine. He immediately looked at the dark bruise on my jaw. His jaw tightened. "I am so deeply sorry, Riley," he said, his deep voice thick with regret. "I should have laid Nolan out right there on the restaurant floor. I should never have let Penelope pull me down." "You did exactly what you had to do," I reassured him calmly. "If you had thrown a punch, Nolan would have pressed assault charges against you. He would have used it to paint both of us as the violent aggressors. We need clean hands to win this war." Jamal shook his head in absolute disgust. "It is not just the assault," he said softly. "It is the way they all rallied around him. The way Richard demanded you apologize. The way Penelope acted like you bleeding on the tablecloth was an inconvenience to her dinner. I cannot look at my wife the same way anymore. I am living with monsters." He reached inside his coat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver object. It was an encrypted solid-state hard drive. He placed it carefully on the sticky Formica table and pushed it toward me. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the drive. "It is the smoking gun," Jamal replied. "You know the financial numbers better than anyone. You found the offshore accounts. But numbers can be debated by expensive lawyers. They can claim accounting errors or mismanagement. This drive contains the raw, unencrypted backup of the executive email servers for the entire startup. Every deleted message, every frantic late-night communication between Nolan and his legal team plotting to hide the money." I looked from the drive to Jamal. "You are the creative director," I said. "How did you get access to the executive backend?" "Nolan is arrogant and sloppy," Jamal explained with a bitter smile. "He refused to pay for separate server hosting when the company was scaling up. He dumped the marketing department files onto the same partitioned server as his private executive communications. He never thought his own brother-in-law would bypass the firewall and download the entire directory." I placed my hand firmly over the hard drive. "Jamal, if Nolan or Richard finds out you gave this to me, they will completely destroy you. They will fire you, bury you in litigation, and Penelope will try to take full custody of your children. You are risking your entire life by sitting in this booth with me. I am risking my soul if I stay with them," Jamal countered fiercely. "I have a daughter, Riley. If I stand by and help a man cover up domestic violence and federal fraud, what kind of father am I? What kind of man am I?" The whistleblower report you triggered this morning set the entire family into a complete panic. Nolan came back from mediation throwing furniture against the wall. Richard is frantically calling his offshore bankers. But they still think they can purge the digital evidence before the federal agents arrive with a warrant. They do not know I already cloned it. I slipped the silver drive into my purse, feeling the immense weight of the weapon he had just handed me. This changes everything, I told him. With this, I can prove malicious intent. I can prove active conspiracy. Jamal leaned back against the vinyl booth, running a tired hand over his face. You can prove a lot more than that, he said, his voice dropping to a heavy whisper. When I downloaded the server, I ran a keyword search just to make sure the files were intact. I ended up reading things I was never supposed to see. He looked me directly in the eye, and the pain in his expression was unmistakable. You need to look at the folders marked for the marketing budget, Riley. Because Nolan and Richard are not the only ones stealing from the company. Penelope is in on it too. Jamal's words hung in the stale diner air, heavy with the weight of absolute betrayal. I pulled my laptop out of my leather tote bag and pushed my half-empty coffee cup to the side. I plugged the encrypted hard drive into the USB port. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the basic security protocols Nolan had lazily installed. Jamal watched in silence as the master directory of the health technology startup illuminated the screen. I opened the folder labeled Marketing and Public Relations. Penelope was not an official employee of the company, but Nolan had appointed her as a freelance brand consultant to justify giving her a corporate credit card. I ran a quick comparative analysis against the company's general ledger. It did not take a forensic expert to spot the glaring anomalies. The numbers practically screamed from the screen. The marketing budget was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate. I clicked on a subfolder titled Influencer Outreach and Promotional Events. Inside were dozens of digital receipts and expense reports. I opened the first one. It was a $50,000 invoice for a private event space rental in Miami, complete with catering and a celebrity DJ. That was not a corporate event, Jamal said, his voice thick with disgust, leaning over the table to look at the screen. That was her 30th birthday party. She told me her parents paid for it. She lied right to my face. I opened another receipt. $12,000 at a boutique in Paris, categorized as wardrobe styling for promotional video shoots. $5,000 at Cartier, listed as executive client gifting. $18,000 for a first-class flight to Dubai, buried under the category of international market research. Penelope was not just using the corporate account for a few lavish dinners. She was systematically treating her brother's pre-revenue startup like a limitless personal piggy bank. She was buying Hermes bags, custom jewelry, and five-star vacations, then falsifying the expense reports to make them look like legitimate business costs. It was textbook corporate embezzlement, and Nolan was rubber-stamping every single one of her fraudulent invoices to keep her quiet about his own offshore transfers. But the true horror of her greed was not the designer clothes or the luxury trips. It was the human cost hidden in the internal communications folder. I opened a separate window displaying the emails from the human resources and payroll departments. Just 2 weeks ago, the payroll manager had sent a frantic, highly confidential email directly to Nolan. The subject line read, "Urgent missing funds for employee salaries." The manager pleaded with Nolan, explaining that 40 junior developers and administrative staff members had not received their paychecks for the month. These were young professionals living in New York City, struggling to pay rent, buy groceries, and cover their student loans. One employee had even sent an email begging for a partial advance to pay for his child's asthma medication. Nolan replied to that desperate email with a callous, dismissive tone. He told the payroll manager that the company was facing temporary liquidity issues and that the employees needed to show loyalty and wait until the initial public offering was finalized. He essentially told them to starve for the sake of his corporate vision. I looked back at Penelope's expense sheet. On the exact same day Nolan told his staff he could not afford to pay them, he approved a $25,000 corporate transfer to cover Penelope's week-long stay at a luxury wellness retreat in Switzerland. They let their own employees default on their rent, so Penelope could get hot stone massages in the Alps. Jamal whispered, rubbing his temples in disbelief. I knew she was spoiled, Riley. I knew she was entitled, but I never imagined she was capable of this level of sheer cruelty. How do I look my daughter in the eye knowing her mother is a criminal who steals from working-class people just to buy another handbag? You do exactly what you are doing right now, Jamal. I told him, closing the laptop and pulling the hard drive free. You stand on the right side of the line. You gave me the evidence to stop them. When the federal agents freeze the company assets, Penelope is going to face severe criminal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud. She is looking at real prison time. Jamal nodded slowly, his expression hardening into absolute resolve. I will file for full custody of our daughter the second the indictments come down, he stated firmly. I am not letting that toxic family poison her mind. I promised Jamal I would provide him with a sanitized copy of the financial files to use in his custody battle. We finished our cold coffee and walked out of the diner into the freezing rain. We went our separate ways, both fully aware that the nuclear bomb we had just armed was ticking down fast. I returned to the Plaza Hotel completely exhausted, but fueled by righteous anger. I thought I had uncovered the absolute bottom of the family's depravity. But as I walked into my penthouse suite and locked the heavy doors, my phone began to ring. It was past midnight. The caller ID flashed a name I never expected to see. It was Beatrice, my mother-in-law. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, watching Beatrice's name flash brightly in the dark penthouse. My mother-in-law had never called me this late. In fact, she rarely called me at all, usually letting Richard dictate every single piece of family communication. I swiped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. Before I could even say a word, I heard the sound of ragged, heavy sobbing on the other end of the line. Riley, are you safe right now? Beatrice asked. Her voice was trembling so violently I could barely make out the words. I am completely safe, Beatrice. What is going on? I asked, my forensic instincts instantly snapping back to high alert. Are you okay? Where are you right now? I am locked in the downstairs guest bathroom, she whispered frantically, as if someone might hear her through the heavy oak doors of their sprawling mansion. Richard is completely tearing the house apart. He came back from his meeting with you at the university club in a blind rage. He was pacing the hallways, screaming into his phone about federal agencies and his corporate board seats. He threw a crystal decanter at the wall. It shattered everywhere. It was just like the old days. I closed my eyes, remembering the faint, jagged scar I had noticed on her eyebrow at the restaurant. Beatrice, did he hurt you tonight? I asked firmly. If he laid a hand on you, you need to call the police right now. I will send a private car for you. No, he did not hit me tonight, she cried softly. But he hit me before Riley. He hit me so many times when the children were young. The scar on my face was from a night he lost a major real estate deal and took his anger out on me. I told everyone I tripped and fell down the stairs. I stayed because I had no money of my own, and I thought keeping the family together was the right thing to do. I thought I was protecting Nolan and Penelope by keeping a roof over their heads. Her voice broke into a heartbreaking sob. But I did not protect them at all. I created monsters. I watched Nolan hit you at that restaurant, and I saw my husband's eyes looking back at me through my own son. When you stood up and walked out, you did what I was too terrified to do 30 years ago. You broke the cycle of abuse. That is why I had to call you tonight. I cannot let them destroy you the way they destroyed my spirit. Take a deep breath, Beatrice, I said gently. You do not owe them your loyalty anymore. Tell me what is happening over there. They are moving the timeline. Beatrice warned, her tone shifting from deep sorrow to sheer panic. After Richard finished tearing apart the study, he called Nolan. They know about the whistleblower reports you filed with the government. They know the federal agents are going to start freezing their accounts as soon as the bureaucracy processes the paperwork. So they are not waiting for next week. They are forcing the initial public offering through early. My mind raced. That is impossible, I said. The regulatory filings require mandatory waiting periods. They cannot just change an IPO date on a whim. Richard called his closest friends at the underwriting bank. Beatrice explained, her voice dropping even lower. He leveraged every single favor he had and threatened to pull his personal investment accounts. They are pushing the public launch to this Friday. They are going to ring the opening bell in exactly 48 hours. The sheer audacity of the move hit me like a physical blow. It was a desperate, incredibly illegal gamble, but I understood their twisted financial logic instantly. If Nolan could launch the company on the public market and secure hundreds of millions in retail investor cash before the Securities and Exchange Commission formally initiated their freeze, he could bury the discrepancies. He could launder the stolen $2 million back into the operating accounts under the guise of post-IPO liquid capital, effectively washing the dirty money clean. By the time the regulators combed through the ledgers, the fraudulent venture capital transfers would be hidden beneath an avalanche of legitimate public trading volume. He would be a billionaire fully insulated by expensive corporate lawyers and Wall Street lobbyists. "Riley, you have to stop him," Beatrice pleaded. "If he gets that money on Friday, he will use it to absolutely crush you." I heard him tell Richard he would hire a private intelligence firm to dig up anything he could to ruin you and your lawyer. He said he would make sure you ended up in a locked psychiatric ward. He is not going to get a single dime of that money, Beatrice, I promised her, my voice turning to absolute ice. And he is certainly not going to ring that bell. You need to pack a bag tonight. Get out of that house before the sun comes up. Go to your sister's house in Connecticut and turn off your phone. The blast radius of what is about to happen will be massive, and I do not want you caught in the crossfire when it goes down. Thank you, Riley, she whispered, sounding like a massive weight had just been lifted from her chest. Give them hell. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked out the massive window at the sleeping city. It was currently early Wednesday morning. Nolan thought he was accelerating his path to absolute power. He thought he was outrunning the federal investigators by sprinting directly to Wall Street, but he had absolutely no idea that I already held the ultimate trump card, a weapon I had secretly built 4 years ago. The clock was officially ticking, and I only had 48 hours to execute the final blow. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Plaza Hotel after Beatrice hung up the phone. The city below was just beginning to stir the dark sky, giving way to the pale light of early Wednesday morning. I had exactly 48 hours before Nolan stood on a balcony overlooking the New York Stock Exchange floor and rang the opening bell. If that bell rang, he won. The moment the health technology startup went public, retail investors, pension funds, and ordinary people would pour hundreds of millions of dollars into his company. That massive influx of clean capital would instantly wash his stolen $2 million clean. He would have armies of corporate fixers and Wall Street lawyers shielding him from any federal inquiry. He would become a billionaire utterly untouchable by a forensic accountant and a divorce attorney. I walked away from the window and immediately opened my laptop. I did not have time to sleep. I sent an urgent encrypted email to Diana Rossini, marked with highest priority. The subject line simply read, "The timeline has moved to Friday. We need to execute the final protocol immediately." Diana called me less than 3 minutes later. I answered on the first ring. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Diana asked, her voice entirely devoid of its usual morning calm. Moving an initial public offering up by a full week requires massive regulatory maneuvering. It means Richard is calling in every corrupt favor he has in the banking sector. "I am certain," I replied, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. Beatrice just confirmed it. They know the federal freeze is coming. They are trying to outrun the Securities and Exchange Commission by hiding the stolen venture capital beneath the public launch. If we wait for the federal bureaucracy to process my whistleblower report, we are going to be too late. By Monday, Nolan will have enough liquid capital and legal protection to drag this out in court for the next 10 years. We have to cut the head off the snake before the market opens on Friday morning. I heard the rapid clicking of Diana typing on her keyboard. If we are going to stop a multi-million-dollar public offering in less than 2 days, she said, her tone sharp and precise, we cannot rely on the government agencies alone. They move too slowly. We have to trigger the kill switch ourselves. Are you ready to expose the holding company, Riley? Once you do this, there is no going back. The entire financial sector will know exactly who you are and what you did. I am more than ready, I told her. I built that holding company 4 years ago for a reason. I just never thought I would have to use it as a weapon to destroy my own husband. Then get down to my office the second the sun comes up, Diana ordered. We have to draft the emergency corporate injunctions, verify the voting rights, and prepare the formal termination documents. You are going to need a new dress too, because if we are going to blow up his life, we are going to do it in person at his exclusive pre-launch gala tomorrow night. The line clicked dead. I set the phone down on the heavy mahogany desk. My heart pounded against my ribs, a steady rhythmic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. The sheer scale of what I was about to do was staggering. I was not just filing for divorce. I was preparing to publicly execute a hostile takeover of a soon-to-be publicly traded corporation. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously organizing the encrypted hard drive Jamal had given me. I cross-referenced Penelope's fraudulent marketing expenses with the offshore transfers Nolan authorized. I built a comprehensive digital dossier that left absolutely zero room for interpretation or legal loopholes. Every single lie, every stolen dollar, and every manipulated document was perfectly indexed and ready to be deployed. As the sun fully illuminated the Manhattan skyline, I walked into the massive marble bathroom and turned on the shower. I let the scalding water wash away the exhaustion of the sleepless night. I carefully washed around the dark purple bruise on my jaw. It was still swollen, a stark, painful reminder of the exact moment my marriage ended and my war began. I did not try to cover it with makeup. I wanted Nolan to see it when I ripped his empire away from him. I dressed in a black suit, grabbed my briefcase, and walked out of the penthouse. The race against time had officially begun. I had 48 hours to systematically dismantle a corrupt corporate dynasty, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. I walked into Diana Rossini's law firm just as the sun broke fully over the Manhattan skyline. Her entire team was already assembled in the main conference room, surrounded by towering stacks of financial ledgers, corporate statutes, and empty coffee cups. The atmosphere was incredibly tense but highly focused. Diana stood at the head of the heavy mahogany table. She looked at me with a sharp, calculating expression that told me she was ready for war. We need the original formation documents for the blind trust, Riley, Diana said, immediately skipping any pleasantries. If we are going to file an emergency injunction to halt a multi-million-dollar public offering by tomorrow evening, I need to see the exact verbiage of the shareholder agreement. I need to know exactly how much leverage you actually hold over this company. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a single heavily sealed manila envelope. I had kept this envelope hidden in a secure safe deposit box for 4 long years, waiting for the day I might need it. I placed it on the glass table and slid it directly toward her. Diana broke the wax seal and began reading the thick stack of legal paperwork. As her eyes scanned the pages, I allowed myself to remember exactly why I had created this corporate weapon in the first place. 4 years ago, Nolan was not the arrogant, untouchable executive he pretended to be today. His health technology startup was on the brink of absolute bankruptcy. His initial seed money had completely dried up, and prominent venture capitalists were literally laughing him out of their boardrooms. He would come home every single night reeking of cheap scotch, throwing his briefcase against the wall and screaming about how the financial world was rigged against him. He was drowning in debt, and his pride would not allow him to ask his father for another humiliating handout. I knew that if his company failed, his fragile ego would shatter completely, and he would make my daily life a living hell. He was already taking his failures out on me through constant verbal berating and emotional manipulation. I had millions of dollars sitting comfortably in the offshore trust my grandmother left me. I had the power to save him instantly. But I knew my husband perfectly. If I simply wrote him a personal check, he would resent me forever. His fragile masculinity could not handle being saved by his quiet, unassuming bookkeeper wife. He needed to believe he was a self-made genius. So I did not write him a check. I hired a proxy law firm in Delaware to establish a highly secretive blind venture capital fund. I named it Apex Holdings. Through a series of intermediary lawyers, Apex Holdings reached out to Nolan with a miracle bailout offer. We injected the exact amount of capital he desperately needed to keep the lights on, pay his developers, and secure his first major medical contract. Nolan was so blinded by his own desperation and unchecked ego that he did not even bother to read the fine print of the term sheet his own lawyers drafted. He thought he was dealing with a group of faceless angel investors who just wanted a standard return on their cash investment. What he failed to realize was that Apex Holdings did not just issue a standard corporate loan. In exchange for saving his company from total liquidation, Apex demanded absolute equity. We did not ask for a minority stake. We demanded exactly 51% of the total voting shares. Diana looked up from the documents, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her sharp face. My God, Riley, you did not just bail him out. You bought him. You are the majority shareholder of his entire corporation. Yes, I replied smoothly, meeting her gaze. He works for me. He always has. He just did not know it. Diana quickly passed the documents to her senior paralegal. Draft the corporate termination notices immediately, she ordered, her voice cracking like a whip. Verify the corporate bylaws regarding the emergency removal of an executive officer. If Riley owns 51% of the voting shares, she does not need to call a formal board meeting. She does not need a shareholder vote. She holds the ultimate veto power over the entire board of directors. Exactly, I confirmed. As the majority shareholder, I have the unilateral authority to fire the chief executive officer for gross financial misconduct. And thanks to Jamal, we have a hard drive full of unencrypted emails proving Nolan embezzled $2 million and allowed Penelope to commit corporate wire fraud. Diana leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the incoming legal slaughter. We will file the injunction under seal with the federal court tomorrow morning to legally freeze the initial public offering. But filing a piece of paper is not enough to stop Richard from calling in his corrupt banking favors or outmaneuvering us in the financial press. We need to deliver the termination notice publicly. We need to sever his control in a place where they cannot possibly hide the fallout. Nolan is hosting his exclusive pre-launch gala tomorrow night at the Plaza Hotel. I told her, feeling the icy resolve settle deep in my chest. The entire board of directors will be there. The Wall Street underwriters will be there. His whole toxic family will be there, celebrating their impending billionaire status. Diana nodded slowly, tapping her expensive pen against the mahogany table. Then that is exactly where we drop the bomb. You are going to put on your best dress, Riley. We are going to crash a party and take your company back. I stepped out of the main conference room and into a small, soundproof glass office Diana had reserved for me. The corporate takeover was currently in motion, but I had one final, devastating piece of digital paperwork to file. The initial whistleblower report I had submitted to the Internal Revenue Service the day before was entirely based on my own forensic accounting. It proved that money was missing. It proved the numbers were aggressively manipulated. But it lacked the one crucial element required to guarantee an immediate federal raid before the market opened on Friday. It lacked documented criminal intent. Thanks to the unencrypted hard drive Jamal had handed me in that greasy diner, I now possessed the intent. I did not just have the manipulated spreadsheets. I had the raw, arrogant emails where my husband and his father openly discussed their illegal financial strategies. I opened my laptop connected to Diana's legal network and navigated directly to the official portal for the Securities and Exchange Commission office of the whistleblower. The federal government takes corporate fraud seriously, especially when it involves an impending initial public offering. Under the Dodd-Frank Act, whistleblowers who provide original actionable information leading to successful enforcement are heavily protected. I did not care about the financial reward the government offered for this data. I only cared about the absolute destruction of Nolan's corrupt empire. I began uploading the categorized folders I had meticulously organized earlier that morning. I uploaded the complete thread of emails between Nolan and his offshore bankers, clearly detailing their panicked strategy to accelerate the public launch. I uploaded the digital signatures proving Richard was the silent guarantor of the Cayman Islands holding accounts. I uploaded every single one of Penelope's fraudulent marketing expense reports, from the $50,000 Miami birthday bash to the luxury Swiss wellness retreats. But the final document I attached to the encrypted payload was the most damning of all. I uploaded the internal human resources email, where Nolan explicitly denied his own employees their earned salaries, perfectly juxtaposed with his approval of Penelope's exorbitant international shopping sprees. That specific document would destroy any chance Nolan had of playing the sympathetic, struggling entrepreneur in front of a federal judge. It proved he was not just a white-collar criminal, he was a ruthless, heartless sociopath. I typed out a comprehensive executive summary to accompany the data dump. I stated that the subjects of this investigation were actively attempting to launch their public offering this Friday to launder the stolen funds. I emphasized that immediate federal intervention was required to protect public investors from a coordinated wire fraud conspiracy. I reviewed the entire package one last time, took a slow, deep breath, and clicked the final submit button. A green confirmation code flashed across my screen. The digital payload was successfully delivered directly to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The government now had the smoking gun and the signed confession. They had everything they needed to secure federal search warrants for the startup headquarters. Diana knocked twice on the glass door and walked into the small office. She held a thick, blue-backed legal folder in her hand. The emergency corporate injunctions are officially filed under seal with the federal court, she announced, her eyes gleaming. The judge recognized the severity of the fraud allegations. The court has quietly issued a temporary restraining order, blocking the underwriting bank from moving forward with the public offering. So it is done, I asked, closing my laptop and feeling a profound sense of finality. The legal framework is fully locked in place, Diana confirmed with a sharp nod. Nolan cannot legally ring that bell on Friday. But he does not know that yet. The federal freeze is sealed until the authorities execute their warrants. Right now, he is sitting in his office thinking he has completely outsmarted you. He thinks tomorrow night is going to be his grand coronation at the Plaza Hotel. I stood up from the desk and picked up my leather briefcase. Then we need to make sure his coronation is unforgettable, I replied. Diana smiled warmly. My paralegals are finalizing the termination documents you will serve him. All you need now is the right armor for the battlefield. I left the law firm and walked back out onto the busy Manhattan streets. I had spent the last 5 years dressing to disappear, wearing muted colors and conservative cuts to avoid triggering Nolan's fragile ego. I was done disappearing. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address for Fifth Avenue. I had a multi-million-dollar corporate empire to reclaim, and I needed the perfect red dress to wear while I burned his world to the ground. I stepped off the Fifth Avenue sidewalk into the velvet-lined interior of a luxury boutique. The sales associate immediately recognized the shift in my demeanor. I was no longer the quiet wife looking for modest tones to fade into the background of my husband's corporate events. I found exactly what I needed in the VIP section. It was a silk gown in a shade of crimson so deep it looked like fresh blood. It was bold, structured, and unapologetically commanding. I handed the associate my matte black Cayman Islands card. The transaction cleared instantly. I carried the heavy garment bag out of the store feeling like a warrior carrying newly forged armor. I returned to the penthouse early in the afternoon. The corporate takeover was legally secured, and the federal whistleblower report was actively sitting on the desks of the Securities and Exchange Commission. But I had one final, deeply personal financial loose end to tie up before I put on that red dress. I sat down at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. Nolan honestly believed he was the primary breadwinner of our marriage. He loved bragging to his affluent friends that his startup equity paid for our sprawling estate, his collection of vintage watches, and the platinum credit cards he so generously allowed me to use. He loved the narrative of the self-made tech genius, providing for his simple bookkeeper wife. It was a beautiful lie that I had allowed him to believe for 5 years to protect his fragile masculinity. The reality was entirely different. When we bought our multi-million-dollar home, Nolan's company was bleeding cash. No reputable bank would approve a mortgage for a man with massive corporate debt and zero liquid assets. To save him the humiliation of being rejected by lenders, I had quietly used my grandmother's offshore trust fund to act as the primary guarantor for the mortgage. I did the same thing for his luxury car leases and his high-limit personal credit lines. I underwrote his entire extravagant lifestyle using my hidden wealth, allowing the banks to put his name on the front of the accounts, while my trust fund silently absorbed all the actual financial risk in the background. When Nolan viciously locked our joint checking accounts and canceled my supplementary cards at the restaurant, he thought he was cutting off my access to his money. He had no idea he was merely playing with the petty cash. I logged into my encrypted private wealth management portal and navigated to the Guarantor Services tab. A long list of Nolan's personal accounts appeared on the screen. The mortgage, the Platinum American Express, the lease on his Porsche, the credit line he used to buy his bespoke Italian suits. Every single one of them was tethered directly to my trust. I did not feel a single ounce of pity as I moved my cursor over the master control panel. I clicked the button labeled Revoke Guarantor Status. A warning prompt flashed on the screen, advising me that removing the financial backing would trigger immediate default protocols on all associated credit lines. The banks would instantly freeze the accounts and demand full repayment of the outstanding balances within 24 hours. I clicked Confirm. The digital severing was instantaneous. I watched the status bars change from active to suspended in real time. I was pulling the financial rug right out from under his custom leather shoes. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed on the desk. I had unblocked Nolan's number just to monitor his inevitable panic. The first text message popped up on the screen. It was not a threat this time. It was a question wrapped in sudden, jarring confusion. "Why did my card just decline at the country club?" he asked. 2 minutes later, another message arrived, the tone growing noticeably more frantic. "The bank just called me. They said the mortgage guarantor withdrew and the house is going into default. Riley, what did you do to the accounts? Answer me right now." I picked up my phone, staring at his desperate demands. He was finally experiencing the exact same financial terror he had tried to inflict on me 2 nights ago. He was sitting at his exclusive country club surrounded by wealthy investors entirely unable to pay for his expensive lunch. His cars were suddenly subject to repossession. His house was officially in default. I typed my response slowly, making sure every word carried the weight of absolute finality. "I did exactly what you asked, Nolan. I stepped away from your finances. See you at the gala." I pressed send, tossed the phone onto the bed, and walked over to the crimson dress hanging on the door. It was time to get ready. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was transformed into a monument to my husband's towering ego. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of New York's elite. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos navigated through the sea of venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, and tech journalists balancing silver trays loaded with champagne and beluga caviar. An enormous digital banner stretched across the main stage, proudly displaying the health technology startup logo alongside the words, "A new era of innovation." Tomorrow morning. Nolan stood near the center of the room, flanked by his father Richard and a group of prominent Wall Street underwriters. He was wearing a brand-new custom-tailored tuxedo. From a distance, he looked exactly like the triumphant billionaire he was desperately pretending to be. But if you looked closely, the cracks in his perfect facade were incredibly obvious. His forehead was slick with nervous sweat. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy brass doors of the ballroom. His right hand was tightly gripping his cell phone, which I knew was vibrating relentlessly in his pocket, with urgent alerts from furious bank managers and collection agencies. I had severed his financial lifeline just hours ago, and he was currently standing in a room full of the wealthiest men in the country, completely broke and entirely dependent on tomorrow's opening bell to save him from total ruin. Across the room, Penelope was holding court with her circle of socialite friends. She was wearing a diamond necklace that she had undoubtedly charged to the corporate marketing account just days prior. She was laughing loudly, throwing her head back and soaking in the attention, entirely oblivious to the federal arrest warrants that were currently being finalized across town. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked down the long carpeted hallway leading to the ballroom entrance. I wore the crimson silk gown. It fit perfectly, the structured fabric hugging my frame and moving with a heavy liquid grace as I walked. I wore my hair pulled back tightly into a sleek, unforgiving style. I wore no jewelry, no distracting accessories. I did not even wear foundation over the dark purple bruise blooming across the left side of my jaw. I wanted every single investor in that room to see exactly what kind of man they were about to give their money to. I approached the velvet ropes blocking the main entrance. Two large private security guards in black suits stepped forward holding digital tablets. "Excuse me, ma'am," the taller guard said, raising a hand to block my path. "This is a private corporate event. I need to see your digital invitation." "I do not need an invitation," I said, my voice completely calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of absolute authority. "I am the wife of the chief executive officer." The guard frowned, looking down at his screen. "I am sorry, Mrs. Hayes, but Mr. Vance specifically instructed us not to allow you inside under any circumstances. He said you were a security risk and that we should escort you off the property immediately." Before the guard could reach for my arm, a deep, commanding voice echoed from just inside the ballroom doors. "Step back, gentlemen," Jamal said, pushing past the velvet ropes. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, but he looked completely detached from the celebration happening behind him. He looked directly at the security guards. "She is not a security risk. She is family. I am the creative director of this company, and she is my personal guest. Let her through right now." The guards hesitated, looking between Jamal and me. Jamal did not break eye contact. He stepped forward and formally offered me his arm. The guards exchanged an unsure glance, but ultimately stepped aside, unhooking the heavy velvet rope to grant us access. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered as I took his arm. "Do not thank me," he replied quietly, his eyes fixed on the crowd ahead. "Just burn it all down." We walked through the heavy brass doors and stepped into the dazzling light of the grand ballroom. The moment my crimson dress crossed the threshold, the dynamic of the room shifted. It was subtle at first. A few investors near the entrance stopped talking. Then a tech journalist lowered her champagne glass, her eyes locking onto the dark bruise on my face. A ripple of whispers began to spread outward, a quiet wave of confusion and sudden tension moving rapidly through the crowd. I let go of Jamal's arm and walked straight toward the very center of the room. I did not look at the ground. I kept my head high, my posture perfect, a crimson predator stepping into a room full of oblivious prey. Nolan was mid-sentence, laughing aggressively at a joke made by an investment banker when he finally saw me. The laugh died instantly in his throat. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. Richard noticed his son's sudden paralysis and turned around. When Richard saw me walking toward them, the scotch glass in his hand actually slipped a fraction of an inch. Nolan thought he had successfully locked me out of his entire life in public triumph. He had absolutely no idea that I already held the keys to the entire building. I kept my eyes locked on Nolan as I walked across the massive ballroom floor. The crowd of wealthy investors naturally parted, creating a clear aisle straight to the main stage. They could sense the sudden shift in the atmosphere. They saw the dark bruise on my face and the absolute lack of fear in my posture. I was a disruption they could not ignore. Nolan quickly recovered from his initial shock. His survival instincts immediately kicked in. He snapped his fingers and pointed directly at me, signaling his private security team. 3 large men wearing earpieces detached themselves from the perimeter and moved quickly to intercept me before I could reach the velvet-lined steps. "Ma'am, you need to come with us right now," the lead guard said, stepping into my path and reaching out to grab my arm. Before his hand could even brush the silk of my dress, Jamal materialized out of the crowd. He stepped squarely between me and the massive security guard shielding me completely. "Stand down," Jamal ordered, his deep voice carrying the undeniable weight of an executive director. "Mr. Vance gave us explicit instructions to remove her from the building," the guard argued, pointing toward the stage. "And I am telling you that if you touch her, I will personally see to it that you are charged with assault," Jamal countered fiercely. "I am a senior executive of this company. She is authorized to be here. Do not get involved in a corporate dispute that is above your pay grade. Step aside right now." The guards hesitated. They were hired muscle, not corporate lawyers. They did not want to be caught in the middle of a corporate civil war. They slowly backed away. Penelope rushed forward from the crowd, her diamond necklace glittering under the bright chandeliers. Her face was twisted in pure fury. "Jamal, what on earth are you doing?" she shrieked, grabbing his jacket. "Are you insane? Get her out of here. She is ruining my brother's night." Jamal looked down at his wife. The warmth that used to reside in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by hollow disgust. "This is not about your brother anymore, Penelope," he said quietly. "This is about you. I filed for full custody of our daughter this afternoon. My lawyer will serve you the papers tomorrow morning. Do not ever speak to me again." Penelope gasped, stumbling backward as if she had been physically struck. She stared at Jamal in absolute horror as the reality of her collapsing life finally hit her. I did not wait to watch the rest of their interaction. I turned my attention back to the stage and began ascending the velvet-lined stairs. Richard stepped forward to block the top of the staircase. He was sweating profusely, his expensive scotch sloshing dangerously. "Riley, listen to me," Richard hissed, his voice a desperate whisper meant only for my ears. "Whatever you are about to do, stop. I will double the offer. $1 million. Right now. Just turn around and walk away." I paused on the final step and looked the patriarch of the family directly in the eye. "I told you, Richard," I replied smoothly. "Keep your money. You are going to need it to pay for your federal bail hearings." I stepped around him and walked directly onto the brightly lit stage. Nolan was completely trapped. He was standing in front of a microphone, broadcasting to hundreds of powerful financial figures. He could not throw a tantrum. He could not strike me the way he had at the restaurant. He was fully exposed under the bright stage lights, forced to maintain the illusion of absolute control in front of his investors. He quickly plastered a fake, strained smile on his face and grabbed the microphone tighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nolan announced, his voice echoing in the massive room. "It appears we have a surprise guest tonight. My lovely wife Riley has decided to join us. As many of you know, she has been going through a difficult time regarding her mental health, but we always support family here." He took a step closer and tried to put his arm around my waist to play the role of the supportive husband for the audience. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply reached out with unwavering confidence and took the heavy silver microphone directly out of his trembling hand. "Thank you for the introduction, Nolan," I said, my voice projecting crystal clear through the ballroom speakers, commanding the immediate attention of every single person in the massive room. "But I am not here to support you. I am here to formally relieve you of your duties." A collective gasp rippled across the grand ballroom. The silence that followed was so thick you could feel the pressure of it pressing against the crystal chandeliers. Nolan froze, his hand still hovering in the empty space where the microphone had been just a second before. His perfectly practiced sympathetic smile shattered into a look of absolute panic. He darted a quick, desperate glance toward the investors in the front row, then stepped aggressively toward me, dropping his voice to a vicious whisper that he thought the crowd could not hear. "Have you lost your absolute mind?" he hissed, reaching out to grab my wrist. "Give me the microphone right now and get off my stage before I have you arrested." I easily sidestepped his grasp. I did not lower the microphone. Instead, I brought it closer to my mouth, broadcasting his pathetic threats to every single billionaire hedge fund manager and tech journalist in the room. "Please do not touch me, Nolan," I commanded, my voice echoing off the gilded walls. "And please do not speak to the majority shareholder of this corporation with such profound disrespect." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some of the underwriters exchanged confused, irritated glances. Nolan let out a forced, hysterical laugh, turning back to the audience and throwing his hands up in a gesture of exaggerated helplessness. "Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive my wife," Nolan said, projecting his voice without the microphone. "As I mentioned, she is suffering from severe delusions. She has nothing to do with this company. She is a freelance bookkeeper who has unfortunately let the stress of our upcoming public offering break her grip on reality." I stood my ground at the center of the stage. The red silk of my dress caught the bright stage lights, commanding the visual focus of the entire room. "My name is Riley Hayes," I announced, clearly ignoring his frantic attempts to gaslight me in real time. "I am a licensed, certified public accountant and a federal forensic accountant. And Nolan is correct about one thing. This company has been under a tremendous amount of stress. Specifically 4 years ago, when this health technology startup was completely bankrupt, drowning in unmanageable debt, and entirely rejected by every reputable venture capital firm in New York City." Nolan stopped laughing. His face turned a sickly ashen gray. The prominent investors in the room suddenly leaned forward, their financial instincts instantly triggered by the mention of undisclosed bankruptcy. At that time, I continued pacing slowly across the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood. Nolan received a miracle bailout. A massive injection of capital from an anonymous group of angel investors operating through a Delaware blind trust known as Apex Holdings. That money saved this company from total liquidation. It paid the developers. It secured the patents. It allowed my husband to stand on this stage tonight and pretend he is a self-made tech genius. That is confidential corporate information." Nolan shouted, his voice cracking in sheer panic. He looked desperately at his father, Richard, who was standing frozen at the bottom of the stairs. "Security, get her out of here right now." No one moved. The security guards were still held back by Jamal, and the investors were far too captivated by the sudden implosion of a multi-million-dollar narrative to let anyone intervene. When Nolan signed the term sheet with Apex Holdings, he was so desperate for cash that he did not bother to have his legal team negotiate the equity, I told the captivated audience. He blindly surrendered exactly 51% of the total voting shares to an anonymous corporate entity. He believed he was dealing with a faceless board of silent partners who would just sit back and watch him grow their investment. I turned to face my husband. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "But a blind trust only stays blind until the owner decides to open their eyes," I said, delivering the final crushing blow. "I used my own personal inheritance to fund Apex Holdings, Nolan. I used offshore accounts to save your fragile ego from the humiliation of being bailed out by your own wife. I am the sole proprietor. I am the absolute majority shareholder of this entire corporation. I own you." The ballroom erupted into sheer chaos. The underwriters from the major Wall Street banks began pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their compliance departments. The tech journalists scrambled to start recording the stage. Nolan stumbled backward, physically reeling from the impact of the revelation. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and finally heard the click. I reached into the small, sleek clutch I had brought with me. I pulled out a perfectly folded stack of thick legal documents stamped with the official seal of the federal court and prepared by Diana Rossini just hours prior. I stepped forward and pressed the documents firmly against Nolan's chest. He instinctively brought his hands up to grab them. "These are your formal corporate termination papers," I announced, my voice cutting cleanly through the chaotic noise of the room. As the majority shareholder holding 51% of the voting rights, I am exercising my unilateral authority to terminate the chief executive officer, effective immediately." Nolan stared at the papers in his hands, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. His billionaire dreams, his arrogant facade, and his complete control over my life were all evaporating under the bright stage lights. But the nightmare was not over for him. I had fired him, but the federal government was about to finish the job. Nolan's hands shook violently as the thick stack of termination papers slipped from his grasp. The heavy documents scattered across the polished wooden stage, fluttering around his expensive leather shoes. He stared down at the pages as if they were venomous snakes. The grand ballroom, previously filled with the polite, sophisticated hum of high society networking, instantly erupted into a deafening cacophony of outraged shouts and frantic whispers. "You cannot do this!" Nolan stammered, his voice entirely stripped of its usual arrogant bass. He looked out at the sea of horrified faces, desperation clawing at his throat. "This is my company. I built this from absolutely nothing. You are just a crazy, vindictive woman trying to ruin the most important night of my life because of a simple marital argument." I stepped right up to him, ensuring the silver microphone caught every single syllable of my response. "You did not build this company from nothing, Nolan. You built it on a foundation of stolen capital," I declared, my voice echoing like thunder across the room. I turned my gaze away from my crumbling husband and looked directly out into the crowd of wealthy venture capitalists and Wall Street underwriters. As the majority shareholder, it is my strict fiduciary duty to inform everyone in this room that the chief executive officer has been actively embezzling corporate funds, I announced clearly. Over the past 6 months, Nolan systematically siphoned $2.3 million from this company into a private offshore holding account. Loud gasps echoed through the opulent room. A few prominent institutional investors immediately set their champagne flutes down on passing silver trays, their expressions hardening into masks of absolute fury. He achieved this massive theft by fabricating vendor invoices for software consulting that never actually existed. I continued smoothly, pacing the edge of the stage to address the entire room. "While you were reviewing his manipulated balance sheets and preparing to invest hundreds of millions into tomorrow morning's public offering, he was hiding the stolen cash in the Cayman Islands. He intended to use your retail investment capital to wash his dirty money clean on the open market." From the back of the room, Penelope screamed, pushing her way violently through the crowd of stunned socialites. "She is lying. She is a jealous, pathetic liar who just wants attention." I looked directly at my sister-in-law, feeling a surge of cold satisfaction. "Am I lying about the $50,000 Miami birthday party you charged to the corporate marketing budget, Penelope? Or the luxury wellness retreats in Switzerland? You and your brother treated this startup like a limitless personal slush fund. You drained the operating accounts to buy designer handbags on the exact same day your payroll manager begged for funds because 40 junior developers could not afford to pay their rent." Richard finally broke out of his paralyzed state at the bottom of the stairs. He marched up onto the stage, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. "That is enough, Riley," he bellowed, attempting to physically block me from the view of the crowd. "You have had your little dramatic moment. Security is going to escort you out right now." I did not back down a single inch. "I am not going anywhere, Richard," I said sharply. "But you certainly will be. I found your digital signatures on the Delaware Shell Company formation documents. You are the legal silent guarantor for your son's embezzlement scheme. You actively helped him launder the stolen venture capital." The lead underwriter from the primary investment bank suddenly pushed his way to the front of the stage. He was a ruthless, silver-haired man who clearly did not tolerate financial games. "Mrs. Hayes," the underwriter called out, his voice cutting cleanly through the shouting. "Do you have actual proof of these allegations? Because if you are making false statements to manipulate a public offering, you will be going to federal prison." I reached into my sleek clutch and pulled out a secondary encrypted flash drive. I tossed it down to him. He caught it effortlessly in one hand. That drive contains the raw, unencrypted executive email servers I told him, projecting my voice over the growing chaos. It contains the wire transfer receipts, the fake invoices, and the written correspondence between my husband and his offshore bankers. It also contains the official whistleblower report I filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission early yesterday morning. The underwriter looked at the small flash drive in his hand, then looked up at Nolan with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "The initial public offering is dead," the underwriter announced loudly to the entire room. He turned rapidly to his associates. "Pull everything. Call the compliance officers immediately. We are completely done here." The massive ballroom instantly descended into total panic. Investors scrambled toward the heavy brass exits, desperately pulling out their phones to cancel their institutional buy orders. The glittering pre-launch gala had transformed into an active crime scene in a matter of minutes. Nolan completely lost what little remained of his sanity. The meticulously crafted facade of the brilliant tech visionary shattered into a million pieces. He lunged at me, his face contorted in sheer rage, screaming incomprehensible threats. But before he could even close the distance, Jamal vaulted onto the stage. Jamal grabbed Nolan by the lapels of his expensive custom tuxedo and shoved him violently backward against the digital presentation screen. "Do not even think about touching her again," Jamal growled, his massive frame shielding me entirely as Nolan's empire burned to ash around us. "What plot twists would you like me to include in the next section?" Nolan struggled fiercely against Jamal's iron grip, his custom tuxedo jacket tearing audibly at the shoulder seam. "She is lying," Nolan screamed, spit flying from his lips as he thrashed like a trapped animal. "She forged those emails. She is a jealous, psychotic woman trying to steal my company. Do not listen to a single word she says." The wealthy crowd was not listening to his desperate pleas. They were physically backing away, creating a wide, empty circle of isolation around the stage. The venture capitalists and hedge fund managers looked at Nolan not with pity, but with the cold, calculating detachment of people who had just narrowly avoided a catastrophic financial disaster. They were already dialing their legal departments, completely abandoning the sinking ship. Richard quickly realized the public relations battle was entirely lost, and the criminal legal battle was imminent. He shifted instantly into ruthless survival mode. "Nolan, shut your mouth right now," Richard barked, grabbing his son by the collar and pulling him away from Jamal. "We are leaving this building. We need to get to the private elevator and call the defense team immediately. Penelope, grab your coat and your bag. We are going straight to the airfield." Richard actually thought he could just walk away. He truly believed his generational wealth and political connections afforded him an invisible shield, a head start to flee the jurisdiction or at least barricade himself behind an army of expensive white-collar defense attorneys. But before Richard could take a single step down the velvet-lined stairs, a sound echoed through the grand ballroom that froze the blood of every corrupt executive in the room. It was the heavy, undeniable thud of the main brass doors being thrown violently open, hitting the marble walls with a deafening crash. The private security guards at the entrance had been completely swept aside. A wave of men and women flooded into the opulent room, entirely shattering the elegant atmosphere. They were not wearing custom tuxedos or designer evening gowns. They were wearing dark tactical gear, navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering across the back, and sharp utilitarian business suits. Federal agents. "Nobody move. Stay exactly where you are," a commanding voice boomed over a portable bullhorn, the sound vibrating through the crystal chandeliers. The ballroom descended into absolute paralyzed shock. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived, flanked by senior regulators from the Securities and Exchange Commission. There were at least 30 agents spreading out with practiced military precision. They rapidly secured every single exit, blocked the private elevators, and took absolute control of the service corridors. No one was leaving. A tall, imposing special agent with silver hair and a stern, weathered face marched straight down the center aisle, walking directly toward the main stage. He was holding a thick stack of manila folders and a heavy piece of paper bearing the unmistakable blue seal of a federal judge. Nolan Vance and Richard Vance, the special agent, announced his boots stopping right at the base of the stage. He did not ask a question. He stated their names with the absolute uncompromising authority of a man who already owned their immediate future. Nolan stumbled backward, his knees practically buckling under the weight of his own sudden destruction. "You have no jurisdiction here," Nolan stammered weakly. A pathetic final attempt to assert his fabricated corporate power. "This is a private corporate event. You cannot just barge in here. This is a federal crime scene," the agent corrected him coldly, not missing a single beat. He raised the document in his hand for the entire room to see. "I have a federal warrant for the immediate seizure of all servers' digital assets and physical property belonging to this health technology startup. I also have federal arrest warrants for Nolan Vance and Richard Vance on multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement." Penelope let out a piercing hysterical shriek from the right side of the stage. She backed away from her father and brother, shaking her head wildly, her diamond necklace catching the harsh light. "I have absolutely nothing to do with this," she cried out, looking around at the disgusted faces of her former socialite friends. "I just did their marketing consulting. I did not know anything about offshore accounts or stolen money." Two female federal agents immediately stepped out of the tactical formation and flanked Penelope. Penelope Vance, one of the agents, said, her tone completely devoid of any sympathy. "We have a separate federal warrant for your arrest regarding the fraudulent misappropriation of corporate funds. Put your hands behind your back right now." The sheer speed and precision of the federal takedown was breathtaking to witness. The government agencies had not waited for the morning sun. They fully understood the massive flight risk involved with billionaires facing federal prison. They had coordinated a massive, multi-agency raid to strike exactly when the corrupt family was completely gathered in one room, utterly distracted by their own towering arrogance. Richard stood completely rigid, his face an emotionless mask, though his hands were trembling uncontrollably at his sides. He knew the criminal game was entirely over. He slowly raised his hands, submitting quietly to the agents who moved in to secure him. But Nolan could not accept reality. As an agent reached for his wrist, Nolan violently yanked his arm away and looked directly up at me. He was breathing in ragged, frantic gasps, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of hatred and total disbelief. "You orchestrated this." Nolan screamed, his voice cracking violently as two federal agents lunged forward to subdue him. They did not treat him like a respected visionary. They treated him like a combative, desperate felon resisting arrest. One agent grabbed Nolan by the shoulder of his torn bespoke tuxedo, twisting his right arm swiftly behind his back. Nolan thrashed wildly, kicking his polished leather shoes against the floor, but the second agent quickly secured his other arm. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly shut around his wrists echoed across the suddenly quiet stage. Nolan slammed his eyes shut, his chest heaving as the cold reality of federal custody finally crushed the last remnants of his towering ego. The golden boy of the tech industry was reduced to a weeping, constrained criminal. The agents read him his Miranda rights in a flat, uncompromising tone, utterly ignoring his pathetic threats as they dragged him away. Richard watched his son being paraded off the stage in handcuffs, and the patriarch's carefully constructed world officially imploded. The sheer weight of the impending federal indictments, the total loss of his generational wealth, and the public destruction of his entire family legacy hit him like a physical blow. Richard suddenly grabbed his chest, his face turning a sickening shade of gray. He gasped violently for air, stumbling backward until his knees gave out completely. He collapsed onto the polished marble floor of the ballroom, clutching his tailored suit jacket as his breathing grew terrifyingly shallow. "Paramedics, we need a medic over here," one of the regulatory investigators yelled, rushing over to the fallen patriarch. But the federal agents did not remove Richard's handcuffs. Even as emergency medical technicians burst through the side doors with a stretcher and oxygen equipment, The federal authorities maintained absolute custody. Richard was hoisted onto the gurney, his wrists still chained securely to the metal railing. He looked up at the crystal chandeliers, his eyes wide with the terrifying realization that his next bed would be in a secured federal medical ward, not his sprawling estate. Off to the side of the stage, Penelope was experiencing her own immediate nightmare. While the agents were occupied with securing her father and brother, she had desperately pulled out her cell phone. I watched her fingers trembling violently as she tried to log into her private banking application. She was trying to wire funds, trying to secure a massive retainer for a high-profile defense attorney before the government could officially freeze her personal accounts. I saw the exact moment the digital guillotine dropped. Penelope stared at her glowing phone screen, her perfectly manicured hands shaking uncontrollably. The screen flashed a bright red error message stating her accounts were suspended pending federal investigation. She frantically dug into her designer purse, pulling out her platinum credit cards. She dialed the customer service number for her bank, her voice shrill and panicked. "Yes, this is Penelope Vance," she barked into the phone, tears of sheer terror streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "My card is declining. Fix it right now. Do you know exactly who my family is?" I watched her face crumble as the customer service representative on the phone delivered the fatal news. Her financial assets were entirely gone. The federal freeze had officially hit the banking sector. She dropped her phone onto the floor. It shattered against the marble, a fitting metaphor for her entire existence. She had absolutely nothing left. No money, no husband, and no family protection. She slumped against the velvet rope, sobbing uncontrollably, as a female federal agent approached to take her into custody. The grand ballroom was emptying very rapidly now. The wealthy investors had fled the scene, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. The tech journalists had gotten their headlines and were rushing out to publish the story of the decade. I stood silently at the very edge of the wooden stage, breathing in the quiet, absolute victory. I slowly looked out toward the heavy brass doors at the very back of the ballroom. Standing in the shadows unnoticed by the rushing authorities was Beatrice. I had told my mother-in-law to pack a bag and flee to Connecticut. She had packed her bag, but she could not resist witnessing the final destruction of the men who had tormented her for over 30 years. Beatrice was wearing a simple trench coat. She looked at Nolan being led out in handcuffs. She looked at Richard being wheeled away. Then she looked directly up at me. A quiet, deeply peaceful smile spread across her face. She gave me a single respectful nod. I nodded back. Beatrice turned around, walked out through the brass doors, and finally stepped into her absolute freedom. 6 months have passed since the night the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel turned into a federal crime scene. The biting Manhattan winter has melted away into a warm, vibrant spring. I am sitting on the private outdoor terrace of a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. The atmosphere is quiet, filled only with the soft clinking of silverware and the gentle evening breeze. Sitting across from me, sipping a glass of crisp white wine, is Beatrice. She looks 10 years younger. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that used to dictate her every movement is entirely gone, replaced by a radiant, authentic peace. The federal justice system moved with surprising speed, largely because the evidence Jamal and I handed them was absolutely insurmountable. Nolan did not get his billionaire status. Instead, he received a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. His high-priced defense attorneys tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the sheer volume of his wire fraud, combined with the sworn testimonies of his own investors, left him with no leverage. The man who used to obsess over custom Italian silk suits is now wearing a standard-issue khaki uniform, stripped of every single ounce of the arrogant power he once wielded. He sends me letters occasionally begging for forgiveness and asking me to put money in his commissary account. I return every single one of them unopened. Richard fell just as hard, if not harder. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not just freeze his assets. They systematically dismantled his entire financial empire to pay back the defrauded venture capitalists. His sprawling multi-million-dollar estate was seized and auctioned off by the government. He was publicly stripped of all his corporate board seats and permanently banned from the financial sector. The former patriarch of the family now lives in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Queens, entirely dependent on a meager pension that the federal regulators legally could not touch. The country club friends he used to brag about do not even return his phone calls anymore. Penelope was forced to face a reality she was completely unequipped to handle. When the federal agents traced her luxury shopping sprees directly to the stolen corporate funds, she narrowly avoided prison time by turning state's evidence against her own brother and father. However, the government still seized her designer handbags, her jewelry, and her luxury vehicles to pay for restitution. Jamal filed for divorce the morning after the gala and easily won full custody of their daughter, providing a massive stack of evidence proving Penelope's criminal negligence. Today, Penelope is working as a shift manager at a mid-tier retail clothing store, forced to actually earn a minimum wage paycheck for the very first time in her pampered life. Jamal, on the other hand, is thriving. After I officially took over as the majority shareholder, I fired the corrupt executive board and restructured the entire health technology startup. The first thing I did was issue massive bonus checks to the developers and administrative staff who had been starved of their salaries. I then appointed Jamal as the new vice president of marketing. Without Nolan's toxic micromanagement holding him back, Jamal launched a brilliant rebranding campaign that secured legitimate ethical funding. We are keeping the company private, and it is more profitable than ever. Beatrice smiles at me across the table, raising her wine glass in a silent toast. She finalized her divorce from Richard 3 months ago. She took the small, clean inheritance she had from her own parents and bought a beautiful little cottage by the beach in Connecticut, miles away from the toxic ambition of her past life. As we clink our glasses together, a young waiter approaches our table carrying a silver tray with our appetizers. He misjudges the angle of the table and the tray tips. A small ceramic dish slides off, shattering loudly against the stone patio, splashing a bit of olive oil near my designer shoes. The waiter freezes, his eyes wide with absolute panic. He begins apologizing profusely, clearly terrified that he is about to be verbally abused by a wealthy patron. I look down at the broken dish, and then I look up at the terrified young man. I do not scream. I do not belittle him. I offer him a warm, genuine smile. Please do not worry about it, I tell him gently. It is just a plate. Everything can be cleaned up and replaced. Take your time. The waiter lets out a massive breath of relief, thanking me before hurrying off to get a broom. Beatrice watches the exchange, her eyes shining with quiet pride. We both know that in the past, a dropped plate would have triggered a terrifying rage from the men we used to love. But those men are gone. We broke the cycle. If you have ever been underestimated, manipulated, or trapped by a toxic family, let my story serve as your proof that you can always rewrite your own ending. Your worth is not determined by how they treat you, and your future is entirely in your own hands. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and finding your true power. Remember, you are always stronger than the people trying to hold you down. Stay safe, and never let anyone dim your light. The most profound lesson to emerge from Riley's harrowing yet triumphant journey is the undeniable importance of preserving your own independence, both financially and emotionally, when navigating toxic relationships. Throughout the story, Nolan and his family weaponized their wealth and social status to demand absolute obedience, operating under the dangerous delusion that financial control equates to respect. They relied on the classic abuser's playbook: publicly humiliate the victim, cut off their financial resources, and gaslight them into a state of terrified submission. However, Nolan's fatal flaw was drastically underestimating the quiet, meticulous strength of a woman who deeply knew her own worth. Riley's ultimate victory teaches us that true power does not come from loud threats, public intimidation, or ill-gotten prestige. It comes from preparation, self-reliance, and the unwavering courage to refuse the role of a victim. Toxic individuals thrive on dependency. By secretly maintaining her own financial sanctuary and professional expertise, Riley effectively dismantled her husband's greatest weapon against her. She proved that when you actively cultivate your own resources, you completely strip toxic people of their ability to trap you in their twisted reality. Furthermore, her story highlights the generational impact of standing up for yourself. By refusing to accept the abuse, Riley not only saved her own life, but also shattered a decades-old cycle of silence, ultimately inspiring her mother-in-law to finally claim her own long-overdue freedom. We are reminded that we never have to shrink our identities, surrender our autonomy, or sacrifice our dignity just to keep the peace in a toxic household. Your worth is never determined by the fragile people who try to diminish you. Take a moment today to evaluate your own boundaries and commit to taking one concrete step toward building your own unshakable independence.